Hello, I'm Elizabeth Broadbent. I'm a professor of health psychology at the University of Auckland. And I have two areas that I am passionate about in research. First is robotics, and this stems from my early love of science fiction books and movies. And I had a dream of making robots that were more caring and more humane than humans ourselves. My other passion is about researching ways to help people who are facing life-threatening health conditions. How can we help alleviate their distress? So today I'll tell you a little more about some of the research I have done in these areas. First of all, robots are not natural. They're not living, they're made of nuts and bolts rather than blood and bones. So how do we relate to robots? The key thing is that we relate to robots like we relate to other humans and animals in the world. This is how we have evolved, to interpret the world through our own perspectives and biases. So we tend to anthropomorphize robots, and the more human-like they look, the more we expect them to behave like humans. And this can influence our cognitions, emotions, and behaviour. So in this study, we found that participants thought that a robot that had a more human-like face on its screen had more mind in terms of agency and experience than a robot that had a silver face on its screen, who had more mind than a robot that just had a blank screen for its face. In other research, we compared the same software running either on a robot or on a computer tablet and studied participants' reactions. So participants were more likely to follow the instructions given by the robot to do a relaxation exercise, including uncrossing their arms and closing their eyes, than they were likely to follow those instructions when given by the computer tablet. They also rated the robot better on technology. They wanted to interact with it more again and thought it was more accurate than the same software on the computer tablet. In addition, they rated the robot as having a better personality in terms of being generous, sociable, popular, reliable, humane, imaginative, and strong than the computer tablet. So combining my interests in robots and healthcare, we've done studies as companions or provide assistance with older adults or people with chronic health conditions. This was one study that we ran in Auckland, looking at whether Paro, which is a companion seal-type robot, could reduce loneliness in older adults in a retirement village and rest home facility. And what we found was that over the course of the study, loneliness reduced in the group that interacted with Paro on a weekly basis compared to a control group where loneliness slightly increased, and the control group were doing activities like craft, bingo, or going on bus trips. So companion robots can help reduce loneliness, and we think this is through acting like a dog or a cat. And some people really bonded with the robot. In other research, we have looked at whether robots in the home of people with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which is a lung condition, whether that can help increase their adherence. So we had the robot in people's homes, which reminded people to do their rehabilitation exercises and take their medication. It also provided education about their condition and monitored their symptoms and use of their inhaler medication. Over the course of the 4-month study, we found that the robot group were more adherent to their exercises and more adherent to their medication. And this had a marginal effect, showing lower days of hospitalisation in the group that had the robot compared to the group that did not. In another study, we looked at whether robots could reduce stress and whether this could affect some of our physiology. So we made a small skin wound on arms of participants using a technique called tape stripping. And you look at the water loss through the skin, and over time this recovers, and this is called transepidermal water loss. So we look at skin barrier recovery over time. While people were recovering, they were randomized to interact either with music, so they listened to their choice of music, or interact with Paro, the seal robot, or they just sat there with no activities. That was the control group. And we found that those who interacted with Paro had significantly faster skin barrier recovery than those in the control group, with the music group halfway in between. And we found that the effects of Paro on healing were mediated by increases in enjoyment. So people enjoyed interacting with Paro, and that's what had an effect on their skin barrier recovery. I've also been doing research with digital humans made by Soul Machines Limited. And in this study, we were looking at whether we could use digital humans to deliver cognitive behavioural stress management. So we compared the delivery of this stress management program by either a digital human, a real human, or on a computerized manual. We found that all three ways of delivering the stress management significantly reduced stress over time. And when we talked to participants from each group, some participants saw advantages in having the digital human run the sessions, as the digital human was seen as less judgmental than talking to a real human. And it was more relaxing than facing a real person. So some interesting insights about possible advantages of virtual humans over real humans. And of course, other advantages are that digital humans are more accessible 24/7, and they don't have waiting lists involved like real psychologists do. So this brings me to a model that I developed during my sabbatical in Boston when I was on a Fulbright scholarship. I wanted to see how we could build robots that displayed clinical empathy. And I based this model on previous research that has been done on doctor-patient communication. So we can see that background variables from both the robot and the patient can influence communication, which then in turn influences patient outcomes. So for example, the robot appearance, so how human-like it looks, its voice, its gender, its personality, and how adaptable it is, can influence communication between the patient and the robot. And in itself, we program the robot in terms of its verbal and non-verbal communication styles and the techniques it uses to build a relationship can then influence outcomes like satisfaction, patient understanding of material, their engagement and their adherence, and can also help reduce things like distress. So we built this theoretical model, and then over the last few years we've been testing it with robots. And for example, in this study, we looked at the effect of robot smiling and robot use of the patient's first name on ratings of the robot's friendliness, as well as other outcomes. And we found that when the robot smiled, it was seen as much more friendly compared to when it didn't smile. And this is an image of the robot here. It's It's just a robot head, but it's in a human-like form. So the robot, when it smiled, was also seen as more human-like. It was seen to have more mind. People thought it was more social and warm, and they smiled reciprocally towards the robot more often when it smiled towards them. So in a series of studies, we've shown that robot smiling, if it leans forward to show it's paying you attention, if it discloses a bit about itself, uses humor and empathetic statements, as well as having a more human-like voice and a more human-like appearance, all of these things can influence outcomes such as the likability of the robot, its perceived empathy and trust towards robots. So these are all important outcomes if robots are to be used in healthcare. So in conclusion, my work is at the intersection of human-like robots, empowering patients, and looking at effects on physiology and health outcomes. So it's in this intersection where my research lies, where I see it continuing, and I hope to make further contributions in this area. And I'd just like to acknowledge all my colleagues and students who have contributed to this work over the years. Thank you.